Today I'm going to be talking about The Stones of Valtara. This is a self-published book by Christopher Clargo. It has been entered into the SPFBO 8 competition, and I was assigned to be the judge of this one, and I'm pretty excited about it. As you can imagine, when it comes to self-publishing, there are a lot of books that can be self-published because anybody can do it, but not everybody is amazing at doing it. And one of the cool things about reading self-published fantasy is that you have the potential to find something new and awesome that you may find before other people hear about it. Like, everybody wants to be one of those cool kids who finds something that's really cool before it hits the mainstream. I can't necessarily guarantee the success or failure of anything, but what I can say is I think The Stones of Valtara by Christopher Clargo has a chance to be loved by many people because it's really freaking cool. The Stones of Valtara is an epic book covering lots of different POVs from different places in a kingdom that was built in a time of turmoil, and maybe it was a kingdom built on some potential lies. On the Goodreads page for this book, it calls it a dark and brutal post-apocalyptic fantasy, and the first three words in the blurb are betrayal, treachery, and war. And yeah, that's what this book contains. You jump in on sort of the midway point of this kingdom that was built on a lot of brutal warfare. A kingdom whose foundation was built by these three orphans who banded together, and against all odds, in the face of a massive force, they managed to unite many clans under one banner, and one of those orphans became the king. One of them became like a brutal tactician, and the other one was sort of the go-to guy who's really good at killing folk. But that is the history of this world. We jump in a place where the kingdom is once again in position to be in great turmoil. And even though there's many legends about how this kingdom came together and there are valiant stories of epic proportions, it quickly becomes apparent that not everything is as it seems, and not everything is super cut and dry, black and white. Many Goodreads reviews you'll find for this book describe it as grimdark, and though I personally have a hard time grasping what exactly people mean by that term, I would say this is a book that has a lot of morally gray areas. While there does seem to be a bad guy in the traditional sense, the good guys that we're following have a lot of skeletons in their closet and a lot of things they're trying to keep hidden from the general public. And throughout the history of this world and throughout the course of this tale, you'll see many of the advertised betrayals take place on the page. And even though it can be a lot to jump into at first, this is a very fun book to follow. The major difficulty that I had jumping into this one is that there are a lot of characters that have tangential or strong relationships to lots of other characters, and you're being thrown in the midst of it. You start in one character's POV, and then you may jump across the kingdom to another person's POV. This is something pretty common in epic fantasy, but the relations that they have with each other as you start to learn more and more POVs are very important to remember, and you have to make sure that you're paying attention because there's a lot here, there's a lot teased, there's a lot of good foreshadowing and conclusion. There's a lot of moments where you go, hey, that seems slightly suspicious, and it turns out it was. And on top of the political story that's being told, you also have personal stories and relationships that develop between characters that you're following that also are tied into the politics and the goings-ons of the kingdom. And on top of that, you also have this other epic level of grand world mystery as things start to be unraveled in the story. All of the power structures and systems at play are only given to you in small doses, and you have to start piecing them together. And yeah, by the end, a lot of it becomes very obvious, but the pieces that are not told to you are just a bigger question that leave you wanting more even when you're finished with the book. Because so much of this book is built around mystery and intrigue, it can be hard to talk about the specifics of what works and what doesn't on a individual level without spoiling anything major, because there's some really cool elements that unfold that are unexpected, but in my opinion, pretty welcome as you start to have everything begin blowing your mind as you're realizing, oh, this person was talking about this person, and oh, is this really what's happening here? There would be many times when I would be reading characters' responses to events that were happening, and I would be very confused because it didn't seem like people were responding in the way that I thought they should respond. And then you find out, oh, there's actually more to the plot that I didn't understand. That's why they're being weird. There's some parts in the very beginning of the book that are very confusing to read, and it's very easy to get lost and I don't understand what just happened. And places where I initially thought the writing was just very confusing, I found out that, oh, it's supposed to be very confusing because of the nature of the grand mystery of what's really going on. So if you do pick up this book and you're finding that characters are not reacting the way that you think they should, or things are described in a way that doesn't make any sense and it's hard to follow, I would would say stick with it, because they aren't actually writing flaws for the most part. They are actually features. And the places that this story goes are really, really cool. They appeal to a lot of my personal tastes. I can understand, and I have a really hard time explaining this without spoilers, but there are twists that happen in the story that might turn certain people off. But if you really want to just buy into the world as a whole, and you want to follow the roller coaster on its ups and downs, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The really cool things that this book does are not completely and wholly original. I have seen them done in other stories before, but never in the way that this story approaches everything, and I like it. I will say that because there's a lot going on and you're just sort of thrown into the tempest of everything, it can be difficult to really attach to characters, especially early on when, there's a lot of people that die. There's a lot of people that you find out aren't really who they think they are, and so it can be a little bit hard to really grasp and latch onto one character in the way that you might in something like a Brandon Sanderson book, where Sanderson does a really good job at focusing on the personality of this character, and you know exactly who they are, and they have their own completely unique voice that you can tell just by reading the third-person descriptors of their thoughts. You know exactly who you're talking about. The characterization in this book is not done as well as the best examples that I've seen, but the way that these characters are plotted and the way that the author has to try to work around telling stories from a POV character who may be lying to the characters that they're with without trying to cheat and lie to the reader the way that somebody like Pierce Brown might try to do. It's a valiant effort, and I think for the most part it succeeds. But like I say, sometimes it creates these scenarios where like, why is this character reacting to this so weirdly? Oh, okay. So with this book being called dark, post-apocalyptic, grim dark, do I think it's really like this super oppressive thing that's really depressing to read? No, for the most part, I think that there are characters that you can get behind and characters that you want to see succeed in ways that I don't know if always exist within this genre. But even with the characters that you love, there tends to be a lot of baggage with like bad things they've done in their past, or bad decisions that they're making based on their own personal struggles. But that's all part of the fun. This never felt like overly dark and oppressive. It felt like, frick, I gotta know what's gonna happen next, because dang, I just had this thing revealed to me and now I gotta find out how this is gonna go where or whatever. But once you start getting some roots in the book and you can start understanding who the characters are, you can follow a lot of the treachery that's going on. You can start to predict a lot of things based on the foreshadowing that you're already seeing, and more of those betrayals start to make more sense and have more impact once you're really solidified in the world and you actually know who's related to who knew who, when, and where, and why. There is a little bit of this element where sometimes there are mysteries that are referred to over and over and over again, but the author never tells you what exactly the mystery was, and it's supposed to create suspense, and it is supposed to carry some of that intrigue. It does get to be a little extreme sometimes, where you know that these characters did something awful in the past, and they will not talk about it. They'll sort of allude to it together, but you don't know what happened. But there are some obnoxious times where, for the fifth time, somebody is referencing something awful that happened. You don't know what it was, and you're just like, frick, will somebody just tell me what's going on and stop referring to everything by these like dark tone, like we know something bad happened, just tell me what it was. And eventually it happened. But that frustration would only be as frustrating as it is if you actually cared about what was being alluded to, and I was really invested in this story. This is the longest book that I've read for SPFBO 8 so far, and it is the one I've been the most invested in because this is just genuinely really good on so many levels, and I don't have a lot of negative things to say about it except what I've already mentioned. I could really see this being something that takes off because there is a lot of good nuggets to be mined from this one. It's the type of book that it could develop its own fandom that's really gonna mine for those nuggets of truth and little one-off comments from different characters once it's kind of revealed what is actually going on, and you could start to piece it together yourself and make predictions for the second book, which potentially could be coming this year. This is the type of book that allows for theory crafting and favorite character battles over who's actually the better character and who's actually really evil. This has all of that nami goodness. Because it's supposed to be something semi-grimdark, I think it's worth mentioning types of trigger warnings. There are moments of sexual assault that are alluded to. None of it is described graphically on the page, but with this being the type of book that it is, it sort of makes sense that it exists in this world. As far as general violence, there's a lot of people killing a lot of people. There's a lot of violent acts that happen. Some of them are described rather brutally, and some of them are fairly tame, but there's a lot of blood that gets shed, a lot of body parts that don't end up well. They just don't end up well on people's bodies. But based on what I know about other grimdark books and the types of things that can happen in these stories, I feel like it's pretty tame on the trigger warning front. At least I think so. Regardless of what happens to this book in the context of SPFBO 8, I do think this book will be finding a following. I do think there's going to be a lot of people that are into what is happening here. I think this is really cool. And if the things that I'm sort of throwing out there sound super interesting to you, I highly recommend this book to you. I think it's really cool. I think that after you give it a little bit of chance to explain itself, you're going to be pretty hooked as well. This is a fantasy story with a voice. This is a fantasy story with presence. And there's a lot of cool things to be found once you start digging into this one. I suspect a lot that I didn't even pick up on with just one read through. Thank you so much for watching this video. Does this one sound really cool to you? Let me know in the comments down below, along with any other questions you might have. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, please hit that subscribe button. If you hit the bell, you'll get notified every time I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. Goodbye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.